Today we're going to talk about the value of doing community research before your church or ministry makes any kind of big decisions. Are you ready? Because it's time.
You're listening to the Church Digital Sidekick Podcast, part of the TCD Podcast Network.
Hey heroes, my name is Tom Pounder. This is the Church Digital Sidekick Podcast. This is a podcast where I bring in ministry leaders and we talk about how we can be more effective in this very digital and online world we're living in today. And today my guest is Tammy Burdick. Tammy is a co-founder and a researcher at Firm Foundations Marketing, and she's based out of Roanoke, Virginia, that area, which is close to me, kind of close to me, where I live in Northern Virginia. And Tammy and I actually met via Twitter and through a friend, Jeanette Yates. I meet a lot of friends through Jeanette Yates, but Tammy and I talk about that a little bit in the interview. But Tammy and I talk today about the value of doing research in your community before you're making a decision in your church, in your ministry. We realize that churches have a lot of decisions that they're going to need to make throughout the lifespan of their church or their ministry. And there is value, tremendous value, in doing research, in particular community research, so you can best serve your community the way you need to as a church. And so I'm really excited to have Tammy on because I've never really talked about this. We've never had a conversation about doing research and the value of that. So I'm really excited to have Tammy on. But before we do that, I do want to highlight at the Church Digital, we have a whole podcast network that is going on. It's not just me. It's not just Jeffrey. We have a variety of other voices out there. And if you want to learn about digital tools and you want to learn about how to do ministry more effectively on this very digital world, don't just listen to my podcast or Jeff's podcast. There are other podcasts in the Church Digital Podcast Network that I would love for you to check out. So go to thechurch.digital, check out the podcast network there, and learn all about how you can be doing ministry more effectively today in this world that we're living in. All right, so without any further ado, let's get into my conversation right now with Tammy Burdick, talking about doing research and the value of that for your church. All right, with me right now is Tammy Burdick. Tammy, how are you?
I'm great, Tom. How are you doing?
I am doing great, and I'm glad you're on the podcast with me. I think you and I met, on a Twitter space, or I started following you from a Twitter space that Jeanette Yates was doing. Is that correct?
That's correct. Okay. Yes. I can't even remember what it was about. I think it was something about Jeanette and another one of her Twitter friends had stepped away from a podcast.
Yeah,
and
Megan
so
Howard. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So and
here
then
we are.
How long have you known Jeanette?
Oh goodness. We have worked and been champions of Texan Church as a company for probably the duration of my little company. So it's Firm Foundations Marketing is the name of our agency. And we found Texan Church along the way, and it's just a great platform. And then I got to know Jeanette because she's just awesome.
Yeah.
And we have yet to meet in person. When Jeanette, one day we're going to meet.
Yeah.
But we've just been friends on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and professionally and personally. And so that's how you and I met, is because of Jeanette.
Well, no, and seriously, I love Twitter. Twitter's my favorite. Hopefully you'll say Twitter's your favorite as well, but I can't guarantee that. But
I enjoy it.
Jeanette and I have known each other for years too, and I've never met her in person. But I've met a bunch of other my Twitter friends in person. So I owe it to Jeanette that one day that we're going to have to meet in person. Yeah. Hey, okay. So talk to me a little bit now. We just started to get to know each other. But this is the first time on my podcast. So tell everyone a little bit about what you do and how you got started in that.
Sure. So I co-own Firm Foundations Marketing. We will be celebrating 4 years this March. And what we do is there is a disconnect that we were seeing early on between what churches were saying and the messages that people were receiving. So whether that, there's been talk about irrelevancy or all of those different buzzwords that have been around the last several years. And what we came to realize over time was not really having a good handle on what was going on with the people, not just inside their church, but outside their church, especially with churches that have been around for a long time. I mean, there's, we're both in Virginia, so there's a lot of churches here that have been around for a long time, and the communities have changed drastically, and that's true for both rural and urban and suburban churches. And so helping them to understand how the community is today and what's going on with it, what real needs and struggles people have, because when you understand what's going on in their personal lives and their homes, then you can meet those needs, you can talk with them, you can pray with them a lot more effectively, and just be able just to serve them in ways that really, really matter. Especially now, churches, they have so many different ways that they want to be able to serve, and trying to decide, like, with limited resources, with limited volunteers and limited staff, which direction that we go in. And so sometimes just knowing the bigger needs of the community and being able to discern that is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've actually given a great segue into what we're talking about today.
You're welcome.
There you go. And again, if anybody's looking for information about Tammy and Firm Foundations, she's going to talk a little bit more about it at the end. We'll also include all the links in the show notes, so just make sure you check on the show notes. But we're going to talk about community outreach and understanding the community and why that's so important today and how you can do that. So talk to me a little bit about that. You've already kind of hinted to some of it already, but why is doing the research on your community and your audience so important?
Yeah, I think, for a lot of years, it was church growth was the big thing. And I still think that church growth and proclaiming the gospel of Jesus is an important thing. But I think for a while, we're kind of figuring that out a little bit. It was that there wasn't as much attention paid to, in some churches, to church depth and trying to understand both, you have to do both. You have to understand both the community outside as well as your community of people inside. And so you want to grow both deep and wide, remember? Like deep and wide. Yeah. It's the same thing. You want to be able to understand everything that's going on, so that you can have healthy, strong roots of your people inside. What is it that your older generations are dealing with? Like, what are they seeking to serve? Do they want to talk with someone? What is going on there? What are families dealing with? There's a lot of sandwich care going on right now, where you've got families that are taking care of older relatives as well as their own kids. Is that something that's a major issue? And then that also changes from community to community.
Yes.
We work with churches all across the country, and every single one of those churches is dealing with something different purely because of the environment that they live in. So you can't necessarily say, oh, this one thing is going to work because it worked at this church elsewhere. It may not necessarily work at your church, in your community, with your particular makeup of people. So really having a hand on what it is that people need is a foundational piece before you go forward.
I'm so glad you hit on that, because I think it's really easy for us that we're in this copycat world we live in. What works in one place, we're like, well, it's got to work in my place because it's gonna work. But the reality is it doesn't always work. What's happening in California is different than happening in Texas, different in Ohio and Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
It's all different. So you have to know and understand your community so that you can best serve it. And again, I like too that every church is different. Some churches have a different target audience
Absolutely.
than other churches. And so you really have to know and understand your community really well.
Absolutely. Yeah. We often tell churches that we work with, we could do the same community study for two different churches, but because of the makeup of their congregation, we could come up with different findings. Yeah. So there's so many nuances that come to it. I think we can all agree that social media is incredibly important, but how a church uses that is going to really depend upon their audience. And I think for a long time, it was really like, let's just throw it up against the wall and see what sticks. Let's apply all the best practices, buy the graphics packs, like all of those things help. But if it doesn't resonate, then you don't really get anywhere. I was just reading the Lifeway Research released a study today saying that the single biggest concern that pastors have is just apathy, the lack of interest. And that's exhausting.
Yes.
Like, I mean, we both work in this space. Like, there's nothing worse than putting your heart and soul into something and then it's crickets.
Yeah.
So, yeah, being able to know what it is that the people are struggling with, or what it is that they care about, and reaching out that way.
So what tools do you use? Do you have a set of tools, or do you have a process that you go through when you're working with churches or ministry groups?
Yeah, so I'll kind of walk through that real quick. We always start off with a scope meeting just to get an idea of how big is the problem, how complex is the problem, is it something a little bit simpler, and then we go from there. We've helped church planters. We've helped churches, like I said, like traditional churches getting to reconnect with their communities. We've been successful doing that. Helping churches figure out like what's next when they're looking for a pastor. What is the church need right now? And what are some of the things that we should be talking about with the pastor? So that's kind of that scope portion. And then from there, I'm using the tools at our resource. So probably one of our favorite tools, at least my favorite tool, is with a group called Mission Insight. And so basically, in marketing parlance, it's household segmentation. And it's a really rich, valuable tool that allows us to go beyond demographics and to be able to see their lifestyle, what's important to them, but also get into their religious beliefs, what they have questions about, how strongly they hold beliefs, all across the scale. And so being able to figure out, what does that look like? Do people, like big, clean, like postmodern spaces with lots of technology, or is that gonna freak people out in your community? Or if there's a specific group you're trying to reach, like what kind of environments? And that's really helpful if there's a church that's trying really hard to reach a particular segment. That happened with a church that we were working with, where we are encouraging them to go for like a non-traditional space.
Yeah.
Because they had a group of young adults in their surrounding community where a traditional church space would be like a huge, like, no, I don't want to go into that space. But if I'm in like a kind of a regular environment, then their guard goes down and they're able to have those conversations. So it's pretty incredible. And then, surveys, interviews, if we need something that's a little bit more nuanced.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. Have you encountered a church or a ministry group that you've worked with before that had like a specific target in mind or a target audience in mind, and then after working through the process with you, they thought, okay, our direction, where we wanted to go or where we thought we wanted to go, is not where we needed to go, and they kind of did a change of pace or a kind of a 180 of sorts?
The one that I just alluded to a little bit, they had an inkling that they needed to do something different.
Yeah.
Which is halfway there, because being already at a place of like, okay, what we've always done like isn't working, and we know we need to do something different. But what does that something different look like? Mm-hmm. And I think what you're referring to is, if I'm understanding correctly, is they need to go in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
What they've been doing. Yeah. That has not happened yet, but I anticipate at some point that it will. And I think that's a part of the hard conversations that we have with churches, is sometimes, you have to let go of what you used to do. Mm-hmm. If the mission is to reach this particular group, to minister to this particular group, all the other stuff shouldn't be as essential.
Yeah.
As it once was. And so being able to let go so that you can do the ministry and the service that's necessary, which is hard. I mean, I come at that as a ministry leader, as a church leader myself, and being able to say like, okay, this isn't necessarily as important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, this wasn't one of the questions I kind of gave you in advance, but how has COVID changed things in the processes maybe that you've walked through with churches? Have they changed at all, or are churches looking for different things in the churches that you've worked for?
Yeah, I think when COVID first hit, it was chaos. One of the first things that we did was put out a piece just to advise leaders on how to stay calm through COVID. Like, what is it that people need? Like, that was literally what we called it, was like calm. Like, this is what people need, just a quick communications piece. Because that was a crisis of a magnitude that we've never dealt with in our lifetime. And the ones who were able to kind of adapt, I don't want to really say like adapt, but they've been able to adjust a little bit more easily, were the ones that had a closer understanding of their communities, of the people that lived around them. The ones that struggled the most, it was either just accepting kind of what was going on and what it was that people needed.
Yeah.
Or it was just a lack of resources. I mean, it was, church leader burnout is real, and it's a problem, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
People are dealing with a lot. Our pastors are dealing with a lot, and there have been more than a handful of conversations where that has been the subject.
Yeah.
Of the conversation has just been, I'm just exhausted. I'm just tired.
Is there anything you coach them with when they tell you that? Or how do you encourage them in the churches?
Yeah, it depends on the situation. I know that a lot of, the conversations when they happen one-on-one, a lot of them, they tend to be handled by my business partner, Tyler Harden. Fantastic. He has a lot of those direct reports. I do a lot of the writing and the research. Mm-hmm. But he's got a great listening ear. And sometimes, they say, leadership at the top is lonely.
Yeah.
And I think that's especially true for our pastors and our church leaders, doubled on top of a time during a pandemic when there's a lot of social isolation just in general.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, if anything in ministry, like, you just want to listen first. And so that's the first thing we try to do is listen to what it is that they're trying to say. There's nothing worse than when you're grappling with something difficult and then someone is just like, okay, that's enough. Like, I'm just going to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just trying to listen. And it's, there's just trying to figure out like what is the best resource for them. Mm-hmm. Is there a Facebook group that we know of that can be helpful? Do we have a mutual connection? A lot of it is just staying in touch with them, mm-hmm. letting them know that we care about them, just as individuals, as people.
Yeah.
So because there's no one. I wish there was one thing, Tom.
No, I listen. I'm a online pastor, student pastor myself.
Yeah.
It's just like, it has been challenging. And I think, as again, we're talking about doing community research and looking at your mm-hmm. audience and what you're doing, but it's important to know who the pastors are and who the ministry people and what they're going through. So I imagine mm-hmm. that's part of your process as you kind of go through stuff with them. Yeah,
we always ask, what has this been like for you? Yeah. Get a temperature check on them. How are they doing? How is their staff doing? Because sometimes they're doing fine. Yeah. And sometimes they're not.
Yeah. Most of the time they're not. They're just faking it. They're totally just faking it. Just okay. Okay. So as you kind of work through this process with them, what other steps do you go through with them to kind of walk through this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we set out to do, especially when we decided to do the research route, and really just focus in on that, is not just hand them a report in a fancy binder that says, here's the research.
Yeah.
I come from a background, both of us do, of doing the research and then applying it. So that's the next part of that process is either a lot of it is virtual, but if it's close enough or if it makes sense, then we'll show up in person, and to be able to explain the workshop, the research in a workshop setting, to be able to say, this is what it is, this is how we can apply it. And especially during that scoping meeting, actually figuring out like, what are your biggest challenges that you're either dealing with, your biggest goals, like, are you trying to grow something, or you're trying to fix something? Let's figure out how we can apply this research to that specific thing that you're using so that it's actionable. The worst thing is for that research to sit in a file, digital or otherwise, and never looked at again. It's too valuable. And once they start to figure out like how they can use it, then that sparks other ideas.
Yeah.
But unless you're a data nerd, like, you don't necessarily see the possibilities. Like, I love it.
Wait, so would you consider yourself a data nerd?
Absolutely. I was thinking about this the other day. So the market research team that I initially was on earlier in my career, they gave me a nickname and a promotion of DJ Data.
Nice. Nice. That is awesome.
So yeah, but the charts and all the different ways of looking at it, it's just, I love it. I love it, but it's not enough to love the numbers. Like, you have to figure out like, okay, what do we do with this? Yeah. What does this mean? How can we apply it?
Yeah, I'm just going to give a quick personal example because I think the data is really important. Is that I work at New Life Christian Church. We're in Chantilly, Virginia, and we were a mobile church, portable church for a really long time. And then we finally were able to secure a building, and we actually bought an old Budweiser distribution center. It was 85,000 square feet. And we're like, what are we going to do with this? And we kind of had a plan and an idea, but we don't know. This was before I came on staff there, but they did a research, and they did research on what does the community want? What does the community need here? And we were envisioning this whole different plan. And what the community told us was that they wanted more indoor sports facilities because there weren't enough of that. And so we thought, we've got this huge building. Let's make basketball courts, indoor turf fields, and a workout area, and let's offer it to the community so that our church is open 7 days a week as a service to the community. And it's been a huge blessing. We've been open for over 11 years now. And it's just been a huge blessing to our community to be able to serve it in that way. But we use the research to be able to determine what the community needed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that area. So it's grown a lot.
Yeah.
And just the need, I mean, youth sports is big. Like, I don't think any youth pastor would argue with you.
Can you come to group tonight? No, I got this practice. It's all the time. So it's so much different than when I was growing up. I mean, yeah. Okay, so as you kind of work through the process, are there other tools or things that you utilize to help churches as they're trying to learn more about their community and what's best to serve them?
Those are the biggest ones. Is doing the audience research. I think that that's a nuance that I forgot to leave out. Is it's not just about knowing the community, also knowing your actual congregation as well. So being able to apply that same information to understand, like, to compare and contrast both your congregation as well as the surrounding community. And that's one of the biggest ones. Being able to talk with people one-on-one is incredibly insightful. So you can kind of go big with the research, being able to have those interviews, to talk to people individually, to hear their specific words. That's powerful.
Yeah,
that's powerful. And so that's like one of the things that I'll include towards the end is how church leaders can do that, because I actually strongly believe that even though this is what I do on a regular basis, and there's very specific ways to get the information you're looking for, I do think those are conversations that all church leaders should be having, regardless of whether their title is senior pastor or, the volunteer who runs the greeting team. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you should always be talking to people.
So you don't just talk to the main pastor board of elders. You talk to a variety of people within the church staff and the volunteers.
We absolutely can. It really depends. Usually our main point of contact, if it's not the senior pastor, then it tends to be like the communications director if it's at a larger church. But being able to talk with as many leaders as makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's possible. If you think about, what it looks like for someone to go from a church guest to a committed member, that's a lot of teams. That's a lot of people that's involved all along the way. And so, when we're going through the larger community research, being able to have as many people present as possible so that everyone is hearing it at the same time, they're getting the different perspectives. They're saying like, oh, like, remember that thing that happened, like with that new guest, like, could we do something in the parking lot, help, solve whatever problem? And you can solve that problem like right there because everyone's at the table. So, at different stages, we bring different people in.
That's cool.
Yeah.
How long is the process what you would take from maybe start to finish? What's the process look like in length?
In length, really that depends on being able to schedule the meetings.
Okay, that's good. That's true. That's true.
But I would say, if we're talking about determining the scope, doing the research, having the workshops, I mean, if we could fast track that and get that done within 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
But for the most part, and with most of the churches we've worked with, simply because of meetings and scheduling and stuff, it tends to be closer to the 3-month mark, but not because I'm not like, come on, guys, let's go. It's just how life works.
I've been trying to schedule with you for a few weeks, and you're just like so busy. So it's just like, just
well, you caught me at my downtime of the year. So there is that. But yeah. And then also, we have the smaller churches. If you've got your leaders have like a regular 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
Or if you have a pastor who's bivocational, which does happen too.
Yep.
But fast track it, we can do that within 4 to 6 weeks. But really the thing I try to encourage our church leaders to keep an eye on is just like, what's the next step? And let's just get to that point and let's remember what it is that we're trying to get done here. And that's something specific coming up. We try to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah.
Well, I think what you do is awesome. I mean, because I think it's so important. And I think, again, as I just gave the example about my own personal church, without the research, we wouldn't know how to best serve our community. So I think that's really important about what you do. As we wrap up, quickly tell me a little bit more about Firm Foundations and how you guys got started, and what are you at now?
Yeah, so Firm Foundations marketing started about 4 years ago. Tyler and I have actually worked together for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
So prior to Firm Foundations, we worked in the newspaper industry. We worked for a large regional publisher down here in Southwest Virginia.
Wait, the Roanoke Times?
It was the Roanoke Times. Yeah. So we worked together for a long time in a lot of different ways. And then 4 years ago, we started Firm Foundations with the intent of helping churches to better understand their surrounding communities so that they can transform lives. And so that has been our mission. And the best way to probably get started with learning about what that can look like for your church would be to go to ministryreset.com. Right. And there folks can download a guide just packed with some of those questions that I talked about earlier. So it's 50 questions growing churches ask. And it's a way, it's has questions just for different groups of people. Whether you're talking to interested in talking to young adults, you've got a young family in front of you. You're talking to some of your older members of your church, and there's different things that people have going on in their lives, and digging into that a little bit more. So we would love to be able to work with every church that listens to your podcast, but a great first step is to download that guide.
That's awesome. Okay, so ministryreset.com. I'll include it in the link, and we'll share that. How if someone was like, I gotta follow Tammy now, I want to follow her, what are your social platforms that you're most on other than Twitter?
Yeah, to Twitter, I'm TH Burdick, which I know you'll include that in the show notes. The rest of our social platforms have been quiet because we've really been doing a lot of listening and talking to our church leaders. And so that's the most active place that we're at right now. And then we have I send out an email at least once a week with helpful tips and information. So today's email was all about looking at the copy that's on your website and a subtle tweak that you could make so that I have an email that goes out every week.
Wait, where is your email at? How do they sign up for the email?
So there's 2 ways that they can do that. If you get the guide, then you have the option of being on the email list.
Great.
So that's probably the easiest way to do it. And I will get you our subscriber link after we hop off the podcast.
Perfect. That'd be awesome.
Rather than give you a big long URL that people are like, wait, what did she say?
Yeah.
I'll put it in the show notes.
That's good. Okay, last question for you. Are you a coffee or tea drinker? What's in the cup?
Oh, well, right now it is tea.
Oh, God.
Because it is in the afternoon and I've become my mother and I cannot have super caffeinated drinks after a certain time of day, which reminds me so much of her. But first thing in the morning, it's coffee. I've got that coffee pot is preset, Tom.
Okay, that's great.
It is ready to go when I wake up.
Are you black, or do you put creamer or sugar in it too, or what?
Oh, I'm a black coffee drinker.
Good. Cheers. Yeah. Cheers to you.
Cheers.
Well, Tammy, it was great having you on. I envision having you on more in the future. So
that would be awesome.
This is great. Best of luck to you. And then we'll catch up soon.
Sounds good.
All right. So what did you think? What kind of questions or thoughts do you have right now after hearing Tammy and I talk about this? There is, again, tremendous value here in doing research. It's just we got to do it the right way. And having someone like Tammy walk you through it, or her marketing Firm Foundations Marketing, walk you through it, it would be a very useful thing for you to do. And so she's given you that great guide that if you just go on her site, and again, I'm going to have all her links on the show notes. So if you just go on her link and just start the process with her, she's going to really help you and your ministry. So I'm really excited for you to connect with her. She's been great to talk to over the past few weeks. And so I think that doing research can have a tremendous impact in your church and your ministry for the long term. So I would strongly encourage you to do that. But if you got questions, if you've got thoughts, if you've got experiences, definitely hit me up on Twitter at @TA_Pounder. I would love to kind of carry on this conversation with you. And Tammy would probably hop on this conversation as well because she's very active on Twitter. So definitely go on there and check it out and let's continue this conversation online. All right, heroes, well, that wraps it up for another Church Digital Sidekick podcast. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, subscribe to this if you want to. It's on iTunes, it's on Spotify, it's on YouTube. There's lots of different opportunities for you to connect there. I would also encourage you to go to the Church Digital. Not just do we have the podcast network that I highlighted earlier in the show, but we also have some coaching, we have cohorts, and we have tons of blog posts out there that encourage you in your ministry today. So make sure you go to thechurch.digital today. All right, heroes, well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and until next time, have a great one.